I hope you brought your Bible. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today we're going to document one of the Guitar of the Month series guitars, which was a limited edition that Gibson did in 2008, where they had 12 really unique, interesting guitars. They each got a special case. They made a maximum of 1,000 of each model. You can learn all about them in this episode, but let's go ahead and see the one that we're documenting. It's actually the very last one from the series that actually isn't part of the year 2008. This is the only 2009 Guitar of the Month guitar. It is the Holy Flying V. Alright, so the whole shtick with this one is it literally has holes cut out of it, and they called it the Holy Flying V. It's not meant to be a religious type thing. It's just, kind of a fun idea. I mean, the Henry J era is well known for being crazy, quirky, and wacky. I mean, this thing even has a cutout out of the headstock in the shape of a Flying V. But then you're going to notice things like the gearless Steinberger tuners. You don't have any tuners sticking out the side here because you tuned them from the back. Some Firebirds also utilized a similar tuner, but Gibson owns Steinberger, so of course they would start using those. Certainly makes it look very futuristic, and that's what the Flying V was back in the 50s. And speaking of 50s Korina Flying Vs, you'll notice the body shape of these is not exactly the same as like a 67 style. It's got the slightly broader shoulders of the Korina V. Now it's not string through and everything, so it's kind of a combination of both of them in that aspect. But on top of all this, we have a satin finish, so it's very similar to a faded Flying V of the era, which was relatively inexpensive. But then you're going to notice, hey, this giant V-shaped cutout has deleted our neck pickup. So this is a straight bridge pickup Gibson that only has a single volume control. You don't have any tone on this thing, so that is one of very few Gibsons that actually utilize this setup. And then if you're curious, does this actually have the rubber guard on the side? No, but it does have something else. This is our control cavity for this, and our output jack is located on the side of the guitar. I didn't even know to expect that. And then something else that makes it unique is the fact that we have a bound ebony fretboard with our split diamond inlays. So you could find these on like the Trini Lopez models back in the 60s. You could find it in the 80s on like the Gibson US1. You could also find it on like the Gibson Vegas series. They're just pretty unique and make this model a little bit extra flashy. So even if you think the idea is kind of dumb, a Flying V with holes cut through it, at least it's unique in many other attributes, and we get a cool case here. It comes with a custom case shroud reading Guitar of the Month 2008. It's not actually attached to the case though, so it's common for people to lose these. The case itself is very similar to a Les Paul Supreme case if you're familiar with those. It's got that nice crushed white interior. It has the bolted on handle to the case. Count it, not 1, 2, but 3 lid ribbons. And then you've got a nice little compartment in here where we've got some of our original case candy, including our pre-pack checklist and owner's manual. However, if you fall in the camp that loves the idea of this, that's not the only holy guitar in Gibson's history. You guys remember how I was telling you this is the last Guitar of the Month, birthed in 2009, technically. It was January. In February, as part of Gibson's Limited Run series, which is the one that came after Guitar of the Week, Guitar of the Month, Limited Run. The reason why most people forget about it is it doesn't have a unique name, it doesn't have a unique acronym. Most of those are lost to time. But 1 month later, 350 of the Holy Explorers were created. Now, it's not as fancy. Yeah, you've got other additional cutouts here, but you have the return of your neck pickup. Your output jack is located in your normal location. It's still only a single volume control, so that's kind of interesting, but you've got your introduction of your toggle switch. Fretboard's pretty boring. We don't have ebony anymore. We don't have binding. We don't have any cutouts out of our headstock, but we'll review and document this one again in a different episode. But you can check out this old one for the time being. As you're saying, hey Trogly, didn't we already unbox this in an unboxing episode? No, I found a second one. Yeah, I'm a crazy guy with 2 of these things. So let's go ahead and throw one of these things onto the workbench to take an individual look at its parts and specs. Inside the Holy Flying V, let's learn about all of its secrets. So, starting off with our pickup, it is an uncovered 57 Classic, which is kind of shocking. You would think they would have went for something like the 500T in this because it is a very modern guitar. But it's also worth mentioning that the 57 Classic has an obnoxiously long lead, but that's because it doesn't really have to go too far. This one reads 7.75 k ohms within the circuit. That doesn't mean you can't rock out with these. It's just not Gibson's hottest pickup. But as far as our humbucker route, we can see it's marked WC, probably for like washed cherry or something like that. And then we've got DSHV, standing for Designer Series Holy Flying V. Other than that, nothing else too crazy in there. But the inside of your cutouts are painted a black color to make it so it doesn't quite stand out when you're playing this on stage, instead of just having like a raw mahogany look. Kind of just looks like a shielding paint, but definitely not the same. You know what's kind of cool though, is this whole design reminds me of the Designer series from the 80s that they did on a Flying V. There was a very similar one to this one that had the outlines. I would love to see Gibson reissue this, but bind the body and bind the cutouts just to make it a little bit more fancier. Maybe do a full-on black gloss finish, make it like the Holy Flying V custom. That would be fun. As far as the bridge and tailpiece, someone has upgraded this one to locking Tone Pros hardware. Or at least I think it's Tone Pros. For whatever reason, none of my Allen wrenches would unlock these ones. But that is not a factory spec. Somebody has done that aftermarket on this one. And here's our lone volume control, just your black bonnet style version without any topper. And then when this review gets really fun is the side. I really didn't know what to expect what would be under here, but it wasn't this. It's basically just a very long channel route that they had to do just deep enough to get the wire all the way down here to get the output jack into a location that kind of makes sense. Because you would want it to be as close to the end as you could, and since we've got a giant hole in the guitar right here, they couldn't run it through the body, so they just ran it through the edge here. Although I would have liked to have seen them use the typical rubber bumper guard that you would see on a 58V, because that's a lot of bare plastic. And if something goes wrong with your output jack, it's not just 3 or 4 screws, it's 8 screws. This is a satin finish. There's a couple of areas where you can see it's been played, so it's kind of buffed a little bit, but nothing quite as crazy as that Guitar of the Week 33 that we had just documented not too long ago. Overall, this one was actually taken care of. I'd say the worst thing condition-wise is a big ding, and it looks like a small touch-up in that area as well. But moving on from our 3-piece mahogany body, we've got the mahogany neck with the ebony fretboard, and your cool split diamond inlays. And I'll say, for being pearloid, they actually look pretty convincing as real mother of pearl, but they are not. But here's another unique spec about this Flying V that you might not have noticed. It's a full 2-octave scale. Most Flying Vs only have 22 frets. But what kind of bugs me here is, look at our side marker inlays. You've got the double for the 12, why don't we have a double for the 24? That's your usual 24 3/4 inch scale length with a nut that measures 1.69 inches. That increases to 2.09 by the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.84 and 0.877 by the 12th. That's actually a pretty skinny neck. Here's that neck profile at the 1st fret and the 12th fret. You can see it gets a little bit flatter the further up the neck you go, but it feels a slightly bit more rounded towards the beginning. The profile itself is still rounded in C, but it's very thin feeling. And now we move on to this goofy headstock. So our truss rod cover looks like this. It's a slightly modified Gibson Flying V1. Has a silver Gibson on the top, and this is what the back looks like. Our truss rod is in perfect shape, and that's all secured by 3 screws, as is typical. But now let's talk about these tuners. These are kinda confusing the very first time you use it, but once you understand them, I've heard a lot of people love these things. If you're watching this in 2023, you can now buy this set of tuners on Gibson's website. They're like 120-ish bucks, depending on what kind of finish you want on them. But up until just a few years ago when Gibson started to offer these separately, you would have to pull these from a guitar. So that's why at auction, we're talking open eBay auctions, these things would sell between $350 to $600 a set. However, that's not the case anymore. So it used to be high risk when working on one of these, because sometimes they just fall apart and they don't go back together. But that usually happens because somebody doesn't know what they're doing. So these are a 40-to-1 ratio locking tuner, which is absolutely insane. So we've got 2 main parts on these. This is how you tune it up and down. You can see as you tighten it down, this bar comes down. So the whole tuner only has so much travel. So if you ever get the issue that you're trying to string one of these things up and you just can't get it to pitch, it's because you don't have your string pulled taut enough. So how this works is your string goes straight through. There's a small little hole just like a normal tuner, but you cannot leave slack here. It has to be as taut as humanly possible. And this part up here is actually what locks the mechanism into place so the string doesn't come off. So once locked in place, as you tune it up, you see what happens to your string? It starts to recess into the tuner, which raises the pitch of your string. Another potential frustration point with these tuners is sometimes these don't lock down tight enough, so as you're tightening it, you want to hold that into place. So with those tips, you should be able to figure these out, and after a couple of string changes, you'll be just fine. But they are kind of freaky and weird, and a little bit intimidating at first. Here's a good example of a frustration when something goes wrong on these tuners. My high E's acting up. So I think I've got it in. It's nice and locked down. We're going to tune it up. But eventually it stops. And you can see this is all the way down. You don't want that. If it's all the way down, you've done something wrong. So at this point, completely loosen it. Unlock it. Take your string out, feed it back through. And then I like to take some pliers because the reason that happened, again, is your string is not taut enough. So get something to help you get it that way. Then tighten this down. And then again, as it goes, hold your locking mechanism in place. So it's just something you kind of learn as you go. But if you're somebody who plays lower tunings and uses really heavy gauge strings, these tuners appear to work better with the heavier gauges. There's something I find strange about the back. You can visibly see the seam lines, and that's a very distinct color difference. And over here you have to have a slightly more keen eye to see it right here. The easiest way to see how many pieces your body is by looking at the edges. So there's a clear seam line, and another clear one right there on the other side. However, on the top, it's not as obvious as it is on the back. Like, this one hides so well, I really just don't even see it. This one you can kind of see, but had I not known it was there, I'd probably question it. Here's what the backside of the guitar looks like. And yes, if you wanted to, you could play this guitar backwards. Oh man, now that I think about it, this is the influencer's guitar. I know there's a guy who does this for like acoustics. He puts a camera in there, but you could use your electric like this. That way you could show off your sweet picking skills. But as far as the control cavity, they still had to put one back here. It's just a single Gibson branded pot. Not Gibson's best soldering work, that's for sure. I suppose they could have got away with just routing a little bit more out on the side and like pre-wiring it, kind of like what they do for the 335s. But no, we've got like a toggle switch style route. And we've got a strap button right here at the base of the heel and another one on the edge. These appear to have been replaced. But moving from our mahogany body, we've got a mahogany neck. Now you might notice this is a more red color. It's probably just because the mahogany used right here was a slightly darker hue. Because the body's mahogany is actually pretty light, but it's got some nice flame figuring within it. But all this was a nice satin finish from the very beginning, although this is very slightly glossed. And then this is how they did the serial numbers. So 08 for 2008, and then I would assume that's some sort of a production. And then this is your limited edition number out of 1,000. And here's the backside of those weird Steinberger tuners. They do have an Allen key adjustment right there. I'm sure that's kind of how you take them off. I mean, you could put regular tuners on here. I don't think I've ever seen anybody do it. I'm not really sure how the holes fit up, but I'm sure you could do conversion bushings if something was wrong. There's your Flying V on your headstock, and made in USA 2008. We've got a couple of bumps and bruises. All said and done, it's just a little over 6 pounds, 6 pounds of 1 ounce. So if you really think about it, it's just like how they do the weight relieving for Les Pauls. They just take some of the mahogany out, but usually it doesn't go all the way through, and then there's a maple cap over top of it. So I think technically this is one of the very few weight relieved Flying Vs. So let's go ahead, plug it in, and hear how it sounds. Gotta say, this thing sounds fantastic distorted. It's just a lot of fun. Because, you know, sometimes people say the neck pickup pulls down their strings, doesn't let them vibrate as much. This just doesn't have any wood there, so it like almost makes you feel freer just to really hammer away at it. I don't have to choose between what pickup I'm using either. It's just a lot of fun. Now that we know all about the Gibson Holy Flying V, part of the Guitar of the Week series, what are my final thoughts on this thing? I had a lot of fun. Now I did have it tuned a half step down, but these strings just felt incredibly slinky on this guitar, and it was super lightweight, balanced on a Strat perfectly despite all the weight relieving everywhere. This is something you want to take out on stage because it's going to grab you a lot of attention and it's a lot of fun to play. So yes, it's a cheaper satin finish, but it still feels good, and you've got a little bit of extra blinginess on the fretboard that, in my opinion, makes the Holy Flying V a little bit cooler than the Explorer that came after it, but yet they both still have their own unique charms. Ultimately, I'm still a little bit scared of these tuners. I'm not the biggest fan of them. I mean, once you get them up and going, they're okay, but I think I would just prefer tradition. But it certainly adds to the quirky aesthetic charm of this thing. But a lot of the Guitar of the Month guitars utilize these weird, crazy things. And just for you. It's not very practical to play that way. Had they had sculpted just a little bit more out right there, then you could get to it a little bit easier. But this is a new way that you can hold your guitar if you want to. So this one will be for sale on my website, the one that I did the demo on, because I already have that cleaner one for my collection. Alright, Troglodytes, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next episode. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.